When I think back to that evening, the image that comes to mind is my daughter's small hands gripping a broom handle almost as tall as she was. She had been moving from one chore to another, her face flushed from the constant effort, her hair sticking to her forehead with sweat. At just 11 years old, she was asked to take on the responsibilities of an adult, responsibilities that even I, as a grown parent, find exhausting after a long day. For 5 straight hours, she was not simply helping out around the house, she was being forced into a cycle of endless cleaning. The living room was spotless by the time I arrived, the kitchen counters gleamed, and the laundry baskets were empty. But the cost of this neatness was visible in my daughter's drooping shoulders, her stiff movements, and her silence. Children are naturally helpful in small bursts, and most parents encourage chores as a way of teaching responsibility. But what she endured that day was far beyond responsibility, it was exploitation of her willingness to obey. An 11-year-old child is still in the middle of learning about the world, balancing school, play, friendships, and rest. She is at an age where encouragement, love, and support matter more than ever. Forcing her to clean the house for hours on end stripped her of that balance, leaving her feeling more like a servant than a daughter. She was too young to even understand why such a punishment had been given. All she could feel was the exhaustion in her small body and the growing fear that no matter how hard she worked, it might never be enough. As I watched her move about the house, there was something deeply unsettling about how automatic her actions had become. She carried a rag in one hand, moving it across the furniture without much thought, her mind dulled by the monotony of repeating tasks. I wondered what kind of message this sent to her, that her worth was tied to her ability to clean, that her mistakes were punishable with endless labor, that her childhood joy could be traded for spotless floors and neatly folded laundry. In her eyes, I didn't see pride for a job well done. I saw fatigue, a dimming spark, and confusion about why she was being treated this way. It is important to realize that children process experiences differently from adults. What may seem like just chores to an adult can feel overwhelming to a child, especially when there is no choice or break given. To spend hours cleaning without rest is to strip away the natural rhythm of childhood, where imagination, laughter, and play are meant to fill the hours. Instead of feeling safe in her home, she likely felt trapped by the never-ending list of duties that were handed to her. A house is supposed to be a sanctuary for a child, a place where she can feel protected and valued. That evening, however, the house itself felt like a cage. Her young body was not prepared for the kind of physical demands she was being put through. She bent over scrubbing floors, her knees pressed against the hard surface, and carried loads of laundry that made her arms ache. Each task piled onto the last until her energy was completely drained. And yet, she wasn't allowed to say no. That, perhaps, was the most damaging part. Being forced into submission for so long left her powerless, her voice silenced. She did not dare ask for rest, for fear that it would only bring more punishment. When children are treated this way, the emotional scars often run deeper than the physical ones. She might not remember the specific day in detail years from now, but she will remember the feeling, that sense of being unloved, unappreciated, and undervalued. Those feelings plant seeds of insecurity and resentment that can grow quietly over time. A child who feels she is nothing more than a worker in her own home may later struggle with self-worth, relationships, and trust. Instead of understanding discipline as guidance, she experiences it as harshness, and that shapes her view of authority and family. This was not about teaching responsibility. It was about control. A child forced to clean for 5 hours is not learning the value of cleanliness. She is learning to obey without question, even at the expense of her own well-being. She is learning that her needs, her hunger, her rest, her play are secondary to keeping the household perfect. And at 11 years old, that is an unbearable weight to carry when a child is pushed into doing something far beyond her capacity. The impact goes deeper than the surface of what we can see. My daughter's exhaustion was not only physical, it was emotional too. At 11 years old, she is still learning how to express her feelings, still shaping her sense of self, and when she was made to clean for hours without a break, Her mind took on a burden just as heavy as the tasks she carried out with her small hands. She is at an age where encouragement builds confidence, where being noticed for small accomplishments lights up her spirit. But that evening, the opposite happened. Instead of recognition or love, she received pressure and punishment disguised as chores. Her innocent mind, still tender and developing, was forced to process the idea that mistakes meant relentless work, that being a child did not excuse her from adult responsibilities, and that her emotions were less important than the condition of the house. As I watched her, I could see the frustration she tried to hide. She didn't want to cry, because crying would only invite harsher words. She didn't want to complain, because complaining might lead to more punishment. So she kept everything inside, swallowing her emotions, turning her face into a mask of quiet obedience. But behind that mask was a storm. The toll it took on her spirit was plain in her body language, her small frame hunched as she moved, her arms heavy, her steps slower with every passing hour. Her silence was not peace, it was surrender. She was too tired to resist, too afraid to show her true feelings. The emotional weight of that experience is not something that fades quickly. A child who feels ignored in her pain learns to guard herself, learns to keep her hurt hidden, and begins to believe that her struggles don't matter. That kind of lesson plants insecurity deep inside her. She might begin to doubt whether she is loved unconditionally, or whether her worth is tied only to what she can do for others. This is a dangerous message for a child to absorb. At 11, she should feel free to ask questions, to laugh, to make mistakes, and to be guided gently back on track. Instead, she learned to keep her head down, to push away her own needs, and to hope quietly that it would all be over soon. The toll was not only emotional but mental as well. 5 hours of endless chores turned into a cycle of monotony that drained her imagination and joy. The mind of a child thrives on play, on discovery, on small bursts of creativity. But during those long hours, all of that was stripped away. Her only focus was on completing the next task, and the one after that, and the one after that. She was denied the freedom to be a child. Her inner world shrunk down to the demands of cleaning. Even when she wanted to daydream, to think of her favorite stories or songs, she could not, because the weight of her responsibility crushed every spark of joy. The physical fatigue only worsened the emotional struggle. As her body grew weaker, her patience thinned, and frustration turned into hopelessness. She was not given a chance to rest, to sit, or even to drink water without being told to hurry. The ache in her muscles was mirrored by the ache in her heart. That combination of physical exhaustion and emotional strain creates a memory that lingers, a moment that a child cannot easily shake off. When her body finally gave in, her mind was left restless, unable to understand why she was being treated so harshly. Children need discipline, yes, but discipline should guide, not break them. What happened that day blurred the line between guidance and mistreatment. Forcing her to clean for so long without consideration of her limits was not a lesson in responsibility, it was an attack on her spirit. The trust a child places in her family is sacred. It is built on the belief that her home is a place of safety, that the people closest to her will protect her from harm. That evening, that trust was shaken. She was not protected from harm. She was placed in the middle of it, with no one to shield her. The emotional toll extended into the hours after the cleaning was done. Her eyes carried the weight of disappointment, her shoulders still heavy even as she set the broom aside. She didn't speak much, but her silence told the story more clearly than words ever could. It was the silence of a child who had been pushed too far, the silence of someone too young to carry the weight she was forced to hold. That silence is what echoed in my heart the most, a reminder of how fragile a child's emotions can be when they are stretched and tested beyond what they should ever have to endure. When the day had already drained every ounce of energy from her small body, what came next was even more heartbreaking. After 5 hours of cleaning, of bending over floors, of carrying loads too heavy for her frame, she was told she could not have dinner. The very moment she expected some relief, maybe a plate of warm food to ease her hunger and give her comfort, she was denied that basic need. For an 11-year-old child, food is not just nourishment, it is reassurance. It is the feeling of safety that comes when a parent places a meal in front of them, a reminder that no matter what happens during the day, they will be cared for at the table. Taking that away was not only cruel, it was an act that cut straight into her sense of security. The hunger she felt that night was not the ordinary kind a child feels after play or school. It was sharper, heavier, layered on top of the physical fatigue already weighing her down. Her stomach growled as she sat quietly, watching others eat while she was told she had no right to share the same meal. The smell of food filled the room, and for a child, that contrast between desire and denial is unbearable. She knew she was hungry, but she also knew she had no voice to argue. She accepted her empty plate in silence, though inside her heart, she must have wondered why the simple act of eating with her family was being taken from her. Denying a child dinner after hours of work doesn't just harm her body, it harms her spirit. Food is one of the most basic forms of love that a parent gives to a child. When that love is withheld, the message is loud and clear: you are not worthy of care. Imagine what it means for a young girl to sit with an empty stomach, her body crying out for nourishment, while the people around her are satisfied and full. That kind of experience tells her she is on the outside, excluded from the very circle where she should belong most. Instead of bonding at the table, she felt isolation. Instead of comfort, she felt rejection. The physical impact of missing that meal cannot be ignored either. Her body had already been drained by long hours of work. Muscles ache more when the stomach is empty. The brain slows down when it lacks energy. For a growing child, food is not optional, it is essential. Skipping dinner meant that her body did not get the strength to recover from the strain of the day. It meant that the next morning, she would wake up weaker, more fragile, and less prepared for whatever tasks awaited her. Hunger is not a punishment a child can simply shrug off. It lingers in the body and weighs on the mind long after the moment has passed. Beyond the hunger and fatigue, there is also the emotional confusion. An 11-year-old does not yet understand the complexities of discipline or the lines between fairness and cruelty. She only knows what she feels. And what she felt in that moment was rejection. She might have thought, if I am not allowed to eat, does that mean I don't deserve to be loved? For a child, love and food are tied so closely together that one cannot be separated from the other. To deny her a meal was to deny her a sign of affection, to tell her in unspoken words that she had not earned the most basic kindness. The look on her face that evening was what stayed with me most. She sat at the edge of the room, her head slightly bowed, her eyes avoiding the table, as though she wanted to disappear. She did not ask for food, though her body betrayed her hunger with quiet growls. She had learned that asking would only bring scolding, that her hunger was not important enough to be noticed. That quiet acceptance of something so deeply unfair is perhaps the saddest part of all. She didn't fight, she didn't complain, she didn't cry, she simply endured. But enduring is not the same as being okay. Moments like these shape how a child sees herself and her place in the family. Dinner is more than just food, it is routine, stability, connection. To strip it away creates a memory of emptiness, a reminder of exclusion, a seed of doubt about her worth. Sitting there with no plate of her own, she wasn't just hungry, she was invisible. And for a child who had already been pushed past her limits that day, that invisibility was the deepest wound of all. Parenting is often described as the art of balancing love with discipline, of guiding children toward responsibility while still protecting their innocence. But that balance is fragile, and when it tips too far, the damage is immediate and lasting. Boundaries exist in every household, but they are meant to provide structure, not to break a child's spirit. That day, when my daughter was forced to work for hours and then sent to bed without dinner, the line was crossed in a way that no parent should allow. Discipline turned into punishment, and punishment turned into neglect. What should have been a lesson about responsibility became instead a harsh example of how easily love can be overshadowed by control. A boundary in parenting should be about teaching children the difference between right and wrong in a way that builds their character. It should never be about exhausting them until they feel powerless. At 11 years old, My daughter is at a stage where she needs gentle correction, not unrelenting punishment. By crossing that line, the message she received was not one of guidance, but of domination. Instead of learning how to take responsibility for her actions, she learned fear, she learned silence, she learned that mistakes are met with consequences that strip away her dignity. That is not a lesson any child should ever carry. The importance of empathy in parenting cannot be overstated. When a child misbehaves or makes a mistake, empathy allows a parent to see the situation through the child's eyes. It creates space for understanding, for patience, and for meaningful correction. Without empathy, discipline becomes cold, mechanical, and punishing. That evening showed me what happens when empathy is forgotten. My daughter was not treated as a child with feelings, with limits, with needs. She was treated as someone whose value depended only on her ability to obey and complete tasks. That absence of empathy was a violation of the trust she should always feel at home. Crossing parenting boundaries doesn't just impact the moment, it reshapes the relationship between parent and child. When children feel they cannot trust their parents to protect them from harm, they begin to build walls around their emotions. They share less, they withdraw, they hide their struggles because they no longer believe their feelings will be honored. An 11-year-old should feel safe coming to her parents with fears or mistakes. But after being pushed past her limits and denied her most basic need, she may think twice before opening up again. She may begin to believe that her family is not a source of comfort but of judgment. Boundaries are also about fairness. Children have a keen sense of what is fair and unfair, and it shapes their view of the world. When discipline crosses into cruelty, the child is left with confusion that lingers. She wonders why she is being treated so harshly, why the rules seem designed not to teach her but to hurt her. This confusion can leave lasting marks on her sense of justice and equality. She might grow up believing that authority figures will always misuse their power, or that love is conditional upon relentless obedience. The fairness she should learn from her family home instead turns into a lesson in imbalance and inequality. It is also important to consider the example being set. Parenting boundaries are not only about guiding children, they are about modeling behavior. When a parent crosses the line into cruelty, the child learns that it is acceptable to treat others the same way. My daughter, watching and absorbing everything, may come to believe that love and harshness must coexist, that denying someone food or pushing them past exhaustion is an acceptable way to show authority. These early lessons shape how she will treat others in friendships, relationships, and even one day as a parent herself. That cycle of misplaced boundaries, if not corrected, continues from one generation to the next. In crossing the boundaries of parenting, we also risk losing the very bond that makes family life meaningful. A child who feels more fear than love, more pressure than support, begins to detach emotionally. The bond of trust, the closeness built through affection and protection, weakens with each unfair punishment. That day was not just about chores or dinner, it was about the invisible line that separates healthy discipline from emotional harm. And once that line is crossed, it takes much more than words to rebuild what has been broken. Empathy is the heart of parenting, the thread that connects discipline with love and structure with understanding. Without it, rules become rigid, punishments become harsh, and the child is left feeling more like a burden than a valued part of the family. In moments of conflict, empathy is what allows a parent to step back and ask, how does my child feel right now? What is she experiencing inside her small world? That question is what separates guidance from cruelty. When my daughter was forced to clean for hours and then denied dinner, the lack of empathy was clear. No one stopped to think about what 5 hours of endless chores would feel like for an 11-year-old child, or what it meant to send her to bed with an empty stomach after all that labor. Empathy is not about excusing mistakes, but about seeing the humanity in the person who made them. A child's mistake should be a moment to teach, not to punish without mercy. When empathy is missing, the child begins to feel invisible, as though her emotions do not matter. That evening, my daughter's tired eyes, her slow steps, her silence, none of it was acknowledged. She was treated as though her feelings had no place in the conversation, as though the only thing that mattered was the spotless condition of the house. But for a child, being unseen in her pain is more damaging than the physical exhaustion itself. Fairness is tied closely to empathy. Children need to believe that the rules in their home are just, that the discipline they face is reasonable. When fairness disappears, respect begins to crumble. My daughter, sitting at the edge of the table without dinner, knew deep down that what was happening to her wasn't fair. She had worked for hours, harder than any child should, yet was still denied the simple comfort of a meal. That awareness of unfairness breeds resentment, confusion, and insecurity. Children who grow up in unfair environments often carry those feelings with them, struggling to understand whether love is truly unconditional or always dependent on performance. Healthy discipline is about balance. It recognizes that children are still learning, still growing, and still making sense of the world around them. Punishment without empathy skews that balance, leaving scars instead of lessons. A child who is guided with fairness learns accountability. She understands that her actions have consequences, but she also learns that her worth is never in question. A child who is punished without fairness learns only fear. She begins to associate mistakes with humiliation, with rejection, with pain. That kind of lesson does not prepare her for the world. It wounds her before she has even had a chance to grow into it. The importance of empathy and fairness extends beyond individual moments of discipline. They shape the foundation of a child's emotional world. When a child grows up in an environment where empathy is present, she feels safe to share her thoughts, her fears, her questions. She trusts that her parents will listen and guide her gently. But when empathy is absent, that trust is shattered. The child begins to hide her feelings, to keep secrets, to retreat into silence. She learns that her inner world is not safe to reveal, and that belief can follow her into adulthood. Fairness also sets the tone for relationships outside the home. A child who experiences fairness understands how to respect others, how to treat people with equality and kindness. She knows that love is not earned through suffering, but given freely. On the other hand, a child who grows up under unfair treatment may struggle to define healthy boundaries later in life. She may accept mistreatment because it feels familiar, or she may believe that controlling others is the only way to feel secure. The absence of fairness in parenting ripples outward, affecting not only the bond between parent and child, but also the child's future relationships and choices. At 11 years old, my daughter should have been learning empathy and fairness through example. She should have seen them modeled in the way conflicts were handled, in the way mistakes were addressed, and in the way love was shown even during discipline. Instead, she saw the opposite. She learned that exhaustion was ignored, that hunger was dismissed, and that silence was safer than speaking out. Those are lessons no child should carry, because they do not build strength or character, they build walls. Walls that separate her from her parents, walls that distance her from her own emotions, walls that will take years to tear down. Respect is one of the deepest needs of every child, and it forms the foundation of healthy discipline. When children are respected, they grow with the belief that their feelings, their needs, and their voices matter. Respect does not mean letting a child do whatever she pleases. It means acknowledging her humanity even in moments of correction. That night, when my 11-year-old daughter was pushed to clean for hours and then sent to bed without dinner, respect was missing entirely. Instead of being treated like a young person still learning her place in the world, she was treated like someone whose value came only from what she could produce, someone undeserving of care once her tasks were complete. Healthy discipline should never strip away respect. It should teach boundaries, responsibility, and consequences while still preserving a child's dignity. The moment respect is lost, discipline becomes damaging rather than constructive. Forcing a child to scrub floors until her arms ache, to fold clothes until her hands tremble, and then sending her to bed with an empty stomach is not discipline. It is humiliation disguised as order. A child who experiences this type of treatment begins to believe that her worth is conditional, that love is fragile, and that respect is something she does not deserve. The importance of respect is tied closely to emotional growth. Children who feel respected are more likely to open up, to share their worries, and to admit their mistakes without fear. They trust that their parents will listen, even when they have done wrong. But when respect is absent, silence becomes the safest option. My daughter, that evening, chose silence. She didn't ask for food even though she was starving, she didn't ask for rest even though her body was weak, and she didn't ask for comfort even though her heart was heavy. She had learned in that moment that her needs would not be respected, and so she hid them away. Respect is also shown through fairness and discipline. Every parent must correct misbehavior, but correction should come in proportion to the mistake. An 11-year-old child does not deserve hours of exhausting labor and denial of food as punishment. Such consequences do not match the scale of any possible mistake. They only send the message that authority matters more than understanding. When a child feels this imbalance, she begins to believe that rules exist not to guide her but to control her. That belief erodes the trust she has in her parents and leaves behind a quiet resentment that grows stronger over time. When respect is present, discipline can be a powerful tool for teaching. It helps children learn accountability while still feeling safe in their parents' love. A child who is corrected respectfully understands that her actions have consequences, but she also learns that her identity is not defined by her mistakes. She knows she is still loved, still valued, and still respected even when she falters. Without that respect, the lesson is lost. My daughter did not learn responsibility from that evening. She learned fear, she learned silence, and she learned what it felt like to be unseen. Respect and healthy discipline go hand in hand because they shape not only behavior but also character. A child who is raised with respect grows into an adult who respects others. She learns empathy, kindness, and fairness because they were modeled for her at home. But a child who grows up without respect may struggle with these values. She may either accept mistreatment because it feels familiar, or she may replicate the same harshness in her own relationships. What she experiences at home becomes the blueprint for how she interacts with the world. Respect also determines the strength of the parent-child bond. When a child feels respected, she is more likely to remain close, to confide, and to trust. When she feels disrespected, distance grows. That distance can be physical or emotional, but both are damaging. My daughter, that evening, sat apart, quiet and withdrawn. It wasn't only hunger or fatigue that kept her silent, it was the absence of respect. She did not feel that her voice, her exhaustion, or her hunger would matter if she spoke. That silence was not just the silence of a tired child, it was the silence of a child learning to shut herself off from those she should have been able to trust most. Every act of discipline teaches two lessons, one about the action being corrected and another about the relationship between parent and child. When discipline is respectful, the second lesson is positive. The child learns that mistakes do not erase love. When discipline lacks respect, the second lesson is destructive. The child learns that love can be withdrawn, that dignity can be ignored, and that her worth can be questioned. Those lessons, once learned, do not fade quickly. They become part of how the child sees herself and how she understands the world around her.